Good afternoon to all of you. How are you doing today? The lockdown has put mental health on the forefront. Among the various concerns that we are grappling with today, one of the grave concerns has been suicide. The age of individuals attempting suicide is dropping. Suicide is among the top three causes of death among the youth worldwide. According to the World Health Organization, every year almost 1 million people die from suicide, and 20 times more people attempt it. A global mortality rate of 16 per 100,000, or one death every 40 seconds, and one attempt every 3 seconds on an average. The figures are alarming. The rates of suicide have greatly increased amongst the youth, who are at the highest risk in one-third of the developed and developing countries. Today, the 10th of September, is marked as a World Suicide Prevention Day. Strategies implemented at a community level and identifying vulnerable individuals may be an effective way at preventing such incidents. Many parents are wary about broaching this subject with their children, as it is a very serious and sensitive topic. And for a very good reason. How do you explain suicide to a young and a developing mind? To answer this and more questions on this topic, we have with us today our expert, Linda Dhakul. Linda is a senior counseling psychologist and a senior faculty in psychology at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. She is also associated as a faculty with the Prafulta Counseling Service, Psychological Services, as well as the St. Xavier's Institute of Counseling Psychology. She specializes in dealing with adolescents, geriatric, crisis situations, aftermath of disasters, post-traumatic stress disorders, and suicide. She has a rich experience of more than 25 years. My name is Deepti, and I'll be a host for today. A very warm welcome to you, Linda.
Hello, Deepti. Thanks.
It's a privilege to have you with us today on this live. As I mentioned, Linda, parents are wary about discussing suicide with their children. How can they explain this to their children, especially the adolescents?
As a way of explaining to the adolescents, one must keep in mind the age of the child and the fact that gender is also important. When the child or the adolescent asks the questions, generally ask them what they want to know, what did they read about, and where did they find out such information. Once you realize that either they have accessed the net or they've listened to a television news, then you can take the topic a little further from there. Don't start immediately telling them everything. Give it a piecemeal depending on the need, and give as much as you think would be enough.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for explaining this. And now we'll move towards the questions which have come in from parents.
All right.
Sure. So today, the first question is from Sugandha. And Sugandha का सवाल हिंदी में है. सुगंधा कहती है कि प्लीज बताइए कि आजकल एक फेमस सेलिब्रिटी की सुसाइड की वजह से जब टीवी पे 24 घंटे कवरेज रहता है, उसको देखकर क्या बच्चों पे पूरा बुरा प्रभाव पड़ सकता है. सुगंधा का बेटा 15 साल का है और वो कहती है कि अभी टीनेज है तो उसका खून गर्म है और कई बार उसे बहुत गुस्सा भी आता है. मैं चाहती हूँ कि उसकी दोस्त बन के उसे सही मार्ग दिखाऊं. प्लीज मदद करें.
Hi, Sugandha. I hope you're doing well. I'd like to just tell you that it is a lot of coverage on the television about a celebrity suicide. One of the important aspects, one can monitor the television viewing habits of a teenager, and that is one way to deal with it. The second is ask him what are the other things that he can do to involve himself rather than just watch that television news. How does it help him to spend that much time in front of the TV? As a mother, a friend, one can involve him and teach him a different set of skills where he could be probably occupied.
Could you tell us, Linda, what kind of conversations can a parent have with a child who's stepping into adolescence?
If a child is an adolescent and he's asking very specifically about suicide or about any conversation?
Specifically about
suicide. All right. So one of the things that one parent can do is, first of all, address the whole topic of death. Death, unlike other topics, is the only thing that we're very certain about. The lockdown today has actually said very clearly that, this has become very real. Why are we in a lockdown? To prevent death. So every child, first of all, needs to understand the concept of death. And somewhere, as we talk about life, first of all, you address what about death? What are their feelings about death? Have they ever experienced the death of a pet, a grandparent, someone? And then you can then broach the topic of suicide. Now, when you talk about suicide, you always need to know what has the child read about it. Did they know about the means? There's a lot of information, unfortunately, on the online. There are 13 reasons why, there are measures, etc. So sometimes the child reads and their questions come from there. Once you know where they're accessing it, then you can go on to start saying that, okay, this is the kind of information that's available. What is it you'd like to know? And if you're talking about suicide, first of all, please, at all times, all parents need to know that it's an illness, it's a mental illness. A suicide is a cry for help. That is something that you have to state at the start, that the person doesn't really want to die. They absolutely want some help, and therefore that attempt is made.
Right.
I hope it answers your question.
I hope, Sugandha, this has been
Yeah,
useful
Sugandha.
to you. Uh, Next, we have Aditya from Delhi, and Aditya's son is in the 10th standard. She says she's not sure how the exams will take place, especially board exams, because if the COVID scare still persists. But she says that she sees him very pressurized with his studies, and at times he stops talking to her and his father. He's also a loner and an introvert. Recently, he has been reading a lot of morbid stories related to death. It scares her, and she wants to know what kind of conversations can she have with the son. How can she connect with him and bring about some kind of positivity?
Uh, First of all, Aditya, hello to you, and I hope that we can reach out in some way to help your son. One of the things is you can look at some of the material that your son is reading and ask him what is it that interests him. Because when you connect to someone, you need to know what it is. If you don't know what that material is, he might think like mommy doesn't know or daddy doesn't know. What shall I tell him? Sometimes a child might be very frightened about what they read. Even an adolescent or a young person cannot always be clear about their reality. So that could be an issue. So checking first of all what they're reading, connecting to that and saying, can you provide other alternatives of what they can read? As a parent, one conversation could be had over a time of lunch or breakfast, a common meal, and talk about what's happening in the day, what's really happening in school. Why is the child feeling pressurized? Is the pressure coming from the school, from the management, from the parent, or does the child really feel I'm not good enough? What will happen in terms of the exam? So if the parent communicates that they believe in the child, they know that the child is good at other things, not just academics, maybe the child will feel connected. One needs to see what kind of conversation is happening at the home. Because if parents say you're free, you need to study, the child picks that up, and so they use all their time trying to study. They also believe that if I don't perform well, I'm not very good. So maybe if the mother can communicate to the boy what about his performance, is he very happy with the subject, is there a subject that he does very well, how, what are his marks about, has he a future plan, then those things will open up the area for the child to talk. If I tell him don't read the book, this is bad, don't do something, teenagers are very very I could say rebellious. Their brain is a very different form, and if you say no, they would want to try. If you tell a little child don't go there, he'll listen to you. If I tell a teenager don't go there, he will go there. So one needs to see, not really being a friend, but at least encourage and say, what is the subject you like? What are the things you like to do? And show interest and develop at least the interest to create the conversation.
Thank you, Linda. Hope this
Welcome.
is useful to you, Aditya. Next, we have Sahil. And Sahil says that his daughter is very hypersensitive. He means she's very overtly sensitive. He says he's very worried about her. She gets disturbed by incidents that she reads about in newspaper. A few years back, one of the students in a school took her own life due to low grades, and it worries him that such things can affect his daughter's fragile mind. What can he do to allay her fears, and what kind of conversation can he have with her?
All right. Hello, Sahil. I hope that we can be able to help you to reach out to your daughter. One, it's an It's a normal anxiety to feel that maybe my daughter is anxious, will something like that happen. If the death of a child, whether it's suicide or sickness, has occurred, then address it with the child. What are the fears? Find out how much do they know. The other thing one can do is find out, when you say she's hypersensitive, there are two levels of sensitivity. One is I'm very sensitive when someone tells me something, or sometimes I watch something and I feel very disturbed. Now, if your daughter is disturbed with what she's reading, there is some way to control it. You can give her things that are also positive. There are probably novels about life. There are lots of TED talks. There's lots of information available that talks about self-esteem, self-growth, motivation. So you can intersperse that, and so she gets a mix of both bad and good, and she's able to build a different kind of a framework in which she views her life.
Sahil, I hope you have taken note, and I hope you can bridge that gap and reach out to your daughter the way Linda explained. Next, we have Amrita from Bangalore, and Amrita's son is 14, and she says that he and like her son and her, they often have open discussions about a lot of things about life in general. But she says now that he's 14, he's very rigid at times with certain beliefs. The other day, they were discussing a news item about a suicide incident, and her son stated that he believes that suicide is a sign of weakness and inability to face odds. So she's conflicted about how she can put this in a different light for him because she has a different point of view. So, what should she say to her son, and how can she take care of that belief?
All right. First of all, let me congratulate you that you have this very open discussion and that you're able to discuss a lot of things with your son. One of the changes with adolescents is they'd like to develop a mind of their own, their thoughts of their own. That is the whole part of the cognitive ability that undergoes a change. So at this point of time, his view will be completely different from yours until he grows up to being an adult, where he adopts maybe a little bit of what you say and something that he experiences with his limited perception of the world. Now, considering that he says that suicide is a sign of weakness, you can't approach it directly because you have a very good rapport and a connect with your son. You're not supposed to change his opinion. You can share your opinion, which is quite different, and say that maybe this is my opinion. You can also explain why you have this opinion. At this point of time, when you share your opinion, he might be able to see the world or see two different viewpoints, and allow him that space to grow and understand that, rather than say what you're saying is wrong. Because for the adolescent, it's not black and white. There are areas of gray. And because he's 14, he feels that this is something that I would probably be able to manage.
Next, we have with us Pradeep, and Pradeep says that he has two sons, 8 and 11. He says he's trying to educate them about different things, including their safety and why they should trust their parents, but he's not sure if he should ever discuss the topic of suicide with them. He's asking, is it important to talk about this topic unless they hear about it somewhere or over media, or if they hear about it in some manner or the other? And what is the right age to have such talks with children?
All right. Hi, Pradeep. I understand the concern about the age appropriate time, and also whether one should choose to do this necessarily if the person or the child has no knowledge about it. So, to look at your concerns first, there is a lot of information available around. If you can sense that your child can manage that conversation, you don't need to give them all the information, but you can mention it, because there is information that they would learn necessarily in a classroom. They would hear it from a friend. They would hear it in a bus while they're traveling to school, and it might become the conversation at the break time in their recess time. So if they hear that, someone might say, oh, you don't know about it, so they might tell them. So you need to educate them briefly, and it's all right to give them some information. And as I said as earlier, one can always say suicide is a cry for help. It is an illness and the individual needs some help. And once that is done, then you can further elaborate and see what the child wants to know. So the child will want to know, does that illness happen to anyone? Does a person fall sick and does this get this illness because he gets bad marks? So they will come up with these questions. Then you can go deeper into the question and you can read a little bit about the information, find out about it, and you can always say that, just now I don't know, but maybe I can find out, I can tell you about it. So you don't start for a 1 hour lecture with the child. If he has asked you a simple question, tell him, let's see, I'll find out about it, and then talk about it. And that would probably help, because it would set at least the tone for some open conversation. Because one of the things that Pradeep shared is like, he wanted to know, if they develop trust. Now trust can only develop with time that you spend with someone, and trust develops immensely when I communicate. When I tell the child that, okay, I'll find out, give me maybe 4 days, I'll tell you about the over the weekend. So over the weekend, it should become the parents' call to say that, yes, you asked me about that question, do you have time, are you free, let's talk about it. But if I dismiss it, I've told you over the weekend, and then I forget about it, and I feel like if he remembers, I'll talk about it, that child will not develop any trust with the parent. Trust develops with commitment, communication, and time.
Thank you, Linda, for explaining this so well. In that light, I also want to ask you, Linda, that today we talk about mental health and the importance of mental health, especially in our youth, in adolescence. And because most of us are in a nuclear setup, and with both parents being busy, the involvement with children, there is an involvement, but it's restricted at many a times, and a lot of times parents are not able to connect with children emotionally or cater to their emotional needs. So what are the signs that a parent should look out where to figure out whether their child is in some kind of a distress, and and find ways to connect with him?
That's a very important aspect that you're asking me, Dipti. And I think that the self check, as you might say, would be observation. Observation is something that any one of us can do. And when you notice a change in the routine of the child, although as being parents who are all out at work, and maybe you say you have less time, you will notice a routine, which means that a child who regularly wakes up at a particular time is taking longer to wake up, who does not go to sleep on time, who suddenly says, I'm not hungry, and probably likes to play outside or play with a game and says, no, I'm not really interested, I don't want it. Sometimes they might even refuse a particular food. Now, there's a possibility that today his mood or her mood might be different. But a change in the routine is an indicator and a marker to start watching whether this refusal is only today, or is it happening for a week. You observe it for 2 weeks, you check about their interaction with others. You also see, is this child spending a lot of time alone? If you have some kind of access to their mobile phone, if it is all right and it's appropriate and you're absolutely worried, you might ask the child's friends, is there something that happened in school? Is there something that happened with the teacher? Were they fired? Were they punished? So sometimes they'll come up with, okay, they had a fight or an argument with a friend, or they got low marks, they helped someone and their friend got more marks. So sometimes it's something small. It's not always there that this is an indicator of a suicide. It might be an indicator of distress, and I think distress should be addressed. And I would add that the distress for a male child should be addressed a little more, because most little boys, even if they are 5 or 15, they feel, I'm a man, I can manage, and I should not talk, I should not seek for help, because I have to handle my feelings on my own.
So Linda, just to ask you, like you said, that the conversations, in fact, you said it a little earlier also, that the conversations that we have with boys vis-a-vis the ones that we have with girls need to be a little different. Could you elaborate a little for us on that?
All right. So today we don't only talk about the male and female. I'd like to say that we do talk also about the third gender. So when I say we are inclusive about conversations, when I'm talking to a boy, we could tell that boy, or a male child, as I would say, that it's okay to experience fear, anger, sadness. Anger, they almost feel that it's a legitimate right. and they feel like it's okay if I get angry, if I want to punch someone, that is something that I have seen and this is something I can do. We also educate and train girls that you cannot get angry, this is not good for you, you have to behave yourself. So when I say male and female, the education for how to express your emotions and to recognize that emotions are legitimate. Now when I say legitimate, one must understand that we all have the right to feel happy, sad, angry, jealous, guilty, all of that. We tell everyone, you can't get angry, don't be sad, it's not needed. If the pet has died, if your wallet is lost, if your mobile is lost, you feel like no, there's no need to worry about it. Arey, don't worry about it. In fact, we also communicate if there's a breakup in relationship, whether it's a boy or a girl, we keep saying that, oh, you're very young and you have a lot of future and then you'll meet somebody else, but then you're not addressing the pain. There is a pain that is very specific because this person was the center of the life. So rather than discounting it, address the emotion, process the emotion. When I say process the emotion, you say, what are you sad about? The good times you had, that you will not meet them, that they're not talking to you, that you can't connect. So then you process the emotion. You can't say ki, that relationship is over, all other people are there, connect to another person. And then you're not processing the emotion. And in terms of males and females, at all times, please remember that both males and females have a right to all the emotions. You don't allow the boy to say, you don't cry, you're a boy, you handle yourself. So boys and men learn not to cry and try to not express their emotions most of the time. In fact, at a older level, it's also called toxic masculinity, where it's not good for them at all.
So thank you, Linda. And since we are on the topic, how can parents model the correct behavior for the children so that they can express their emotions freely, be it of either gender?
All right. So when you're talking about modeling emotions, I think that in the way we connect to each other as a couple, or if you have in-laws, because this is an Indian setup, joint family. So when there are grandparents, if there's an aunt, even house help, how do you connect to people? How do you actually express your annoyance with something that you don't like? Say, for example, that there's extra salt in the food. So are you going to make a drama about it? Are you going to communicate it? Are you going to deal with it in a way, or are you going to make this a big issue? If you look at it, 360 days of your life, when you eat a meal, most of the time the food might be all right. But if it's the only day or 1 or 2 days, if it happens and you actually express your disgust and your anger, the child realizes and copies the behavior because he feels that this is an issue, this is a kind of behavior I have seen in an adult. So he's not going to say, I need to copy it. He just learns it. If he stays in a home where violence is normalized, where people raise their voices and talk, they use foul language, they actually call each other names, they sometimes call each other's family names, then the child picks that up. He doesn't need to go to a school, he doesn't need to say that I'm going to learn because my mother's saying that. You live in the environment, we pick up things. And I think that we all forget that we all are teachers. We are teachers, you and me, all of us, in what we do. So when the child is in the house, if I say to the maid or to someone, please, can you pass over the salt? Can you pass the rice? The child learns that. That is where he learns to communicate. He also learns the feelings in terms of how do we deal with grandparents, with the spouse, even if you're married for 5 years, 15 years, or even if for a short time. How do you connect and relate to each other? Is there affection that is primary and important, or are the negative emotions that are very powerful and that show their appearance at every time? So I have had the experience where sometimes a boy has seen his dad treat his mother badly. The boy picks that behavior. So that's why I think that, the only adults in the marriage have to build that connect very strongly with each other. And the child will be a product of that, in not just in the genes, but also in the way his environment shapes him.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for explaining this in great details. If you have joined this Parentune Live just now, I would like to tell you that today we have with us our expert, Linda Dhakul, who's a counseling psychologist. And today, being the World Suicide Prevention Day, we are talking about suicide and mental health. And in fact, we are talking mental health and suicide intervention. So please post your questions in the comments section. And please remember, we first take questions from Parentune app, website, and then the social handles. We have a parent with us today, Linda, and her name is Richa. And Richa's son is just 7 years old. Richa says that just a couple of days back, he walked up to her and asked her, "What is suicide?" And she says, because in a joint family, the TV news channel is on always, and the child is exposed to a lot of information. So, because he's too young, she's not sure whether she should really talk about this, and if she should, then what should she say?
All right. Hi, Richa, and I really understand the complexities of even being in a joint family and a child of 7 being subject to that information, especially by the TV channel. One of the things, because the child is just 7 years old, one can actually tell the child that it's a sickness and it is something that has happened, and the news is reporting necessarily because it's a celebrity. Beyond that, you don't need to do that. The other way is some control as a parent. The television might be on, but if you can get the child to be involved in another activity or move the child so that he or she is not subject to so much of information overload, that would be the best thing. I hope I've helped you, Richa.
Richa, hope this was helpful, and thanks you, Linda. Linda, how does one talk to a child if such an incident has happened in very close quarters, say within the family or with a person who's known to the family? How should the parents handle when it comes to communicating with their children?
So, Dipti, one needs to find out if this is an adolescent person or is it a really young child. Because if it's a young child, it will go across necessarily as death. In fact, in India, all of suicidal deaths are recorded as accidental deaths. You will not have a record that says suicide. So one can say to a young child that it was an accidental death or it was a death that occurred because of drowning. You don't need to explain to him that the person jumped into the pool or a well or jumped before the train. You can say it was an accident. In the case of an adolescent, you cannot say necessarily an accident. I think that the best analogy I would say is to recognize the brain is an organ like any other organs. So if your heart is not working and you have major issues with it, first of all, we recognize that it being the most powerful organ, we are going to go to a cardiologist. So we can tell an adolescent that if there is a problem with the brain, which is the most and high functioning, and I call it what is my hard disk of my computer, I need to see a psychiatrist because I need to know if something is gone wrong there. And if it is something that's really wrong, I need to also assess how important, how urgent it is. So when you have an injury on your leg, you have a sprain, you have a fracture. We also know that a sprain is slight. It will, your leg will heal with an ice pack, a rest, a little bit of medication, but you'll be fine. A fracture is little more serious. It requires maybe hospitalization, medical care. You can't deal with a fracture in your house. So when you talk of a mental illness, in the case of suicide, there is enough literature to explain the role of the brain in the person who attempts suicide. So in this case, one can tell the adolescent, this individual will require help from a psychiatrist and it is a serious psychological problem. So in that form, you might be able to address it. And when you address it to biology, I think the adolescent would be really also happy because there are two things. One, you can tell the cause. And secondly, you also present the fact of hope that this can be treated and this person will be fine.
Right.
I hope that answers.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And Linda, since you were talking about the need to seek professional help from a psychiatrist, so we have a psychologist and we have a psychiatrist. Just for this benefit of our parents, could you elaborate on what's the role both of them play and how are they different? So, in case they need help for their child, who should they approach and why?
All right. So if you have a mild adjustment issue or the child is an adolescent, you have shifted from Mumbai to Delhi and you've got the child is in a new school, whether he's a child or an adolescent, and you realize that the student or the child is having a problem of adjustment, then one can talk to a psychologist. However, If you realize the routine change, as I mentioned earlier, are very, very pronounced, they're absolutely present for over a period of 6 weeks. Although we use the 6 months kind of criteria, I think that, one does not wait for 6 months. When you realize that the issues are such that it's now interfering in the house, you might probably see that books are not complete, the academics are falling. At some point of time, if the child has also shared with you that he feels or he has a thought of death, then you would need to see a psychiatrist. Everyone does not need to see a psychiatrist. If there is a problem that's very, very serious that requires medication, you need to see a psychiatrist. At all times, a psychologist is sufficient enough.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for giving us an idea about what a psychologist does and what a psychiatrist does. Since we are talking about suicide today, I would like to ask you now, when we talk about adolescents are, this youth who's going to become adults, who's going to turn into adults in a few years' time. So, how can we teach our adolescents, our teenagers, to be more sensitive and responsible towards our community when such incidents have taken place? Uh, so, what I'm trying to ask is, how can we reach out to families of the victim, who has indulged in this act?
All right. I think Dipti has brought to center something very important, that when an suicide is attempted and if the person has actually died, it is important to reach to the family as a community. So, as an adolescent, the adolescent may not have the skills at that point of time, but it's quite possible that if it is their friend, if it is someone from the class, you can reach out to the parent and keep in touch with the parent and check how they are. Also, one needs to know if the parent is open for that visit in the beginning. Initially, they are in shock and they're very traumatized. So sometimes the presence of another child might bring back memories and might cause grief. So unless you assess the situation and you feel that that parent is open for some discussion, then the child or the adolescent can connect and reach out to that parent. Adults can reach out like we would reach out to anyone in grief. And I think that the discussion is important, because what happens is people start either talking about it differently, there are rumors that are spread, and the adolescent somehow has a confused idea of what really happened. Now, little bit of clarity of what really happened does not mean I go into the details of the suicide, but I can say there was a death that occurred. That person merits the same amount of compassion that anyone else who has faced death in their family. When a person dies as a result of suicide, many a times that family is alienated. Many a times people don't reach out and people almost feel that something is wrong. One needs to know that suicide actually runs in families. There is research for that, and families who have lost a member to suicide have to be under observation, and they have to be someone who looks out for them, because they are all going to be extremely traumatized by the suddenness, the unnatural, and the whole circumstance of the death. And as you said, sometimes nobody in the family even has an idea that something was wrong. So it comes as a huge shock when they feel like everything seems all right and something like this happens. The other thing is, we often associate suicide with a breakup, with a loss in academics, with maybe lack of money, but it's not really true. The individuals who are very, very successful, and if you look in terms of Hollywood celebrities, etc., money and fame are not related to suicide. They're not, and that is something that we can talk to adolescents about.
Thank you, Linda. Linda, you also mentioned about depression a little bit earlier, where you said depression is also biological. So, what can parents do to arrest that in their children when they see certain signs of stress or some kind of a pressure that the child may be facing?
All right. So there are two things what you're saying, Dipti. When I say stress, all of us experience stress of different types, and we have our coping mechanisms. Honestly, we don't need a psychologist there. So we cope either by working hard, by either running away, which may not be the best thing, but might be the best thing at that time, or we probably do nothing about it. But when I talk about depression, there is a criteria And only if you meet the criteria, a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist are the only ones who probably diagnose the depression. Now, if that depression is diagnosed, one also needs to know whether it's biological or whether it's psychological. Once you are aware of that, then you need to follow with medication, because medication takes care of the imbalance of the neurotransmitters that might be responsible for the depression. Everyone who's depressed may be at a risk for suicide, but please remember, everyone who's depressed does not commit suicide. Depression is treated, you get cured, you can manage, and you can live a normal, functional life.
I think you made a very important point that depression does not necessarily imply that the person is going to commit suicide, and that there is, of course, hope and there's a lot of help available if parents are seeking. So, Linda, since you shared a number earlier, I would like to share it with our parents who have joined the session today. This is a call where you feel that if somebody is in need of immediate help, where you think they might attempt taking their own life. So please reach out to the following helpline numbers. The first is Samaritan, and the number is 9969622 And the other is I call 022 2552 1111. I will be repeating these numbers towards the end of the session once again. So do use these numbers in case you feel somebody is in need of immediate help. So Linda, going to our next question, we have Radha with us, and Radha says that a 10-year-old son has very low patience and he's very, very obstinate. If he does not have his way, he withdraws himself. And lately, she's been seeing him draw pictures of people killing each other or pictures which are violent. And she's feeling very alarmed. And because she hears so many, uh, morbid news items on TV, it concerns her even more. So, how can she connect with a child, and how can she kind of turn him around in terms of changing his state of mind?
Hi, Radha. I understand this is a real concern with your 10-year-old son. One of the things is that you could check what are the video games that he's probably accessing and playing. That is one thing. Secondly, when he has drawn a picture which you think is violent, you can ask him what has he drawn and create a conversation about the picture. Sometimes the images are only from memory of what they have seen. It may not be something that they're planning to do. In terms of being obstinate and wanting to have their own way, I think that that is a behavioral issue, and those two are not linked together. So the behavioral issue can be addressed by a psychologist, it can be addressed by you, and by teaching the child patience, which is a tough call, but you'll have to invest some time in the child and not give in to all his needs. He might throw a tantrum, you ignore it. Long as there's no harm, you can change that behavior pattern. I hope this helps you, Radha.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Thank you for explaining this. Next, we have Preetha, and Preetha says that her daughter is 11 years old. When she was 8, somebody in a higher class had attempted suicide, but she was saved just in the nick of time. Now, recently, her daughter had a chance of connecting with this girl, and she ended up asking her some uncomfortable questions. So the mother had to intervene and stop the conversation there and then. But then her daughter feels that something is being hidden from her. So, how can she put this in the right light for her?
All right. So this is quite a tough and a challenging one, where the child has actually reached out to the person who has attempted suicide and created a conversation about it. I think that since the conversation has started, the mother has interrupted that conversation and not allowed the child further access. So what happens is the child really believes that something is being hidden from her. So in this particular case, one can use a small example and say, there are some things that we respect and don't necessarily ask, because it might not be helpful to the child who has made the attempt. Because he or she will feel distressed that you're asking them about something. They'll feel ashamed, They might feel guilty. So maybe when you're a little older, you can talk about it, but just now it will probably trouble the child. So put that as an example, saying that you have an illness, you're at home. If somebody says, "Are you had COVID," then you feel bad about it. You don't want to even think about it. As a result of which, that child might understand it from the perspective of empathy, not really don't ask, don't find out, not that as such. I hope this helps you.
Next, we have Anup. Now, Anup has a very important question, Linda. And Anup says that about a year back, his cousin's son had attempted suicide. And he says he has never talked about it, but because he wanted a closure on this, he's bringing this question up. He says that his cousin's son had attempted suicide and they stopped him just in time. He has been undergoing therapy sessions, but now, he doesn't know how to reach out to the family because it became a big news and a taboo. So though he wants to reach out to them, they are not very open. So how can he go and kind of tell them that he's with them? I'm sorry. And also connect with his nephew.
All right. So, Anup, I understand your need to reach out to the family. Whenever we reach out, always understand you're reaching out in your need or their need. So, you want to communicate, you're there. But at this point of the time, the family is not really ready for this kind of acceptance or disclosure, because it actually makes them face the fact that somebody made an attempt. So, at this point of time, one needs to just stay away rather than reach out, because reaching out in your need because you want to feel that I understand, I'm with you, they may not appreciate it. So we always look out when you help someone, even when you go as a volunteer. I often find that, when you do charity, if there is no poor, you can't do charity. You can't be a volunteer unless someone needs your service. So you can't be a volunteer unless somebody needs that. So one recognizes why you want to do this, why you want to take on the role of a volunteer, because you want to feel good. I'm going a volunteer here. I'm at a volunteer at cancer service. I'm a volunteer for children with special needs. I want to feel happy. I want to feel useful. But I also want to know, is the child happy? Is the person being helped? If that is not the real goal and objective, and they're not going to be comfortable with you reaching out, it's a hard call and it's a tough call, and you might feel that I'm not being good enough. But I think one respects the space and time that people need to be when they're ready to give help. It's almost like, I cannot give you water assuming you're thirsty. I have to check, are you thirsty, then I'll offer you water. Secondly, I can't say that you drink water because I give you water in my house. You might want juice. So recognize the needs of different people and give them what they like when they like. It's not about you and when you want and when you're ready. I think that's part of learning.
So Linda, in fact, I wanted to ask you one more question regarding, again, now that Anup asked this question. In case one has to reach out to a family where this incident has taken place, what is the right time to do so? Because, there are so many emotions and turmoil that the family is going through. And you don't want to put yourself as a person, like you said, that you don't want to do it just because you want to feel good about it, but you want to do it because you feel the need to genuinely reach out to the family and be with them in their time of need and grief. So what is the right time to connect with a family or to reach out to them when such an incident happens?
So one of the things that we do as part of the Indian culture, whether you're a Hindu, Muslim, or a Christian, when there's a death in the family, we have a ritual, a family prayer, all of that. After which follows, where some people very clearly state in the news or otherwise that they do not want any condolence visits. When you get that kind of message, you stay away. But in other cases where a family has not said something, you can decide to visit the home immediately in the first week or the second week. But when you go there, you don't ask them any questions. Sometimes you just sit with them, and if they want to talk, let them talk about the person who has gone, about anything. Sometimes you spend time quietly, and you can leave a note saying that if you need to talk, do call up and probably tell me if I should come, then I will probably talk about it. I think that in most families they respect that. Remember, the trauma and shock of losing a loved one is very, very powerful. So at that point, it almost is, when you come, you take me back to the incident and I re-traumatize the person. So sometimes people need that space. Some people are happy that people come and talk to them and visit them. So you go the first day, you probably spend about 10-15 minutes and you go back. Don't wait for a conversation to happen. Then maybe you leave a note, maybe you take flowers or you take food, whatever is your culture. You sometimes we offer prayers. So when you offer a prayer in a note or something, you can write there, write your email, write a card, write your phone number and say that if you need to talk, please call up. And if they say yes, they will call up. And people do reach out. I've seen people reach out. Sometimes everyone in the family will not reach out. When you visit, one person might be more willing to talk to you. In fact, one of the person might actually want to talk to you, but the others may not want. So if you get someone who's willing, you talk to them and also allow the family to grieve. I think we must respect that.
So if you have joined this session right now, I would like to tell you that today, the 10th of September, is marked as the World Suicide Prevention Day. And today we have with us our expert, Linda Dakul, who's a clinical psychologist with more than 25 years. And she's sharing her perspectives on mental health and suicide intervention. So please post your questions in the comment section, and we'll be happy to take your questions and take them to Linda. Next, we have Rita. And Rita's question is, what are the symptoms of suicidal tendency in an adolescent, and how can one help?
So, Rita, actually, there's no symptoms of a suicidal tendency. What you have is suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is a thought that I feel like killing myself. I either express it verbally to someone, I write it somewhere, I send messages, I put it up on social media, and sometimes I start giving away my things that I absolutely love. So, those would be very basic signs for ideation. Suicide by itself has no criteria, understand that.
Right. Linda, since we were discussing that when one can reach out to a family where such an incident has taken place, so this is just again a similar question that I want to ask you. So if you have a child, whose friend has committed suicide, now is it right for the child to go and connect with the family members, or rather not connect, but how do you lessen his grief? How do you lessen his grief? How do you lessen his trauma? Because that person might have been his friend or cousin. How do we do that?
All right. So you're saying that how to deal with the child who has experienced the loss?
Yes, experience the
All
loss.
right. So, Dipti, when a child or an adolescent has experienced the loss, first of all, you deal with it at your level if that child is within your house and under your care. And you talk to the child asking him what he feels about it. Do they have fears? Do they understand what has happened? And many a times a child or an adolescent has very mixed information. Some of the information is inaccurate. So your role as a parent could be to clear that confusion and to clear the doubts. After that has happened, one does what is called a little bit of psychoeducation. So when I say psychoeducation, you can tell the child that you will get thoughts about this person who has died. You think about him when it's birthday. When it is his birthday, you think about it. When you go to school, if you've shared a lot of time, you look out for that person. So there are memories that are intrusive, and that happens for a while. You can't suddenly wipe the person out from your and think that okay, he's gone, so he's not there. So you don't dismiss it completely. Explain to the child that it's natural, you will feel that. Remember, to feel is an absolute all right thing. To also recognize, it's all right for the child to feel. It's a proof that he's human. That's why he's feeling sad. If you're made of wood and stone, you don't feel anything. So it's okay to feel sad, to cry. I think that you normalize the grief. You also allow him to say, it's all right to feel bad. It's a real check that when your child experiences this emotion, this is a real human being.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you for sharing that insight with all of us. Now we have a question from Amar, and Amar is asking, what is the right age to talk about or explain suicide to a child?
Amar, you're asking a very complex question. I think there is no right age for the child. It is not like sex education that happens at a particular age. This is a mental health issue. This is a mental health concern. If the child has experienced some kind of trauma because of hearing or watching, depending on that, only then you talk about it. It's not a regular conversation at your breakfast or lunch table at all. So I'm not going to say 3 is the appropriate age, 5 is the appropriate age. Yes, if there's a 5-year-old in your home, there's a suicide in the building, then you can tell the child that there was a death that occurred because of an accident. You can talk about it, but you don't need to go into the details of suicide there, because the child does not have the ability to process the information. A 10-year-old child will say that, but I heard this happened because he hung himself. So now the child has lots of information. Then you sit down and tell the child. You tell him that the person was sick, was troubled, and they probably did something that they did not know, but they did not want to die. But death occurred because of the snapping of the medulla that happens at the neck. One dies when the medulla is snapped, necessarily because your oxygen supply between the brain and the rest of the body is stuck. So that for a 10-year-old child is fine. A 15-year-old child will need a little more explanation, because he's not looking about the brain and the medulla. He wants to know why, what happened. So you can say that actually you don't know what happened. You still have to find out. But then you can talk about how suicide is a mental illness. And just like when you have some symptoms of fever or any of that, you go and see a doctor. Similarly, when you have illness symptoms that are related to mental illness, you see a doctor. Say, for example, you've been told that if you cough and sneeze and all of that, please check and take a COVID test. We do that. And we follow it very regularly, to the point of, like, we've had cold, we've had cough, we probably suffered for a week, we never bothered about it. Today, if anyone sneezes, you almost feel like, you need to do a test. So you explain the analogy, always give an example appropriate to the child, find out from where the question comes, and don't give information, literally sit down and explain the detail. You don't need to do that.
Thank you. Linda, you said that there are times when a child might need help or a person might need help, which is professional help. But when a person who is suffering from depression does not want to talk about it, be it an adolescent, uh, but it's important to talk to him. So even though this person may not want to talk, how do we reach out and help?
All right. So what you're bringing about, Dipti, is a very important aspect in the Indian context, is stigma. So if somebody has cancer, there is stigma associated with it, but they might even say that, okay, this person has cancer. But in terms of depression, most people don't even want to accept the label, because people feel that depression is equivalent to being weak, to be mental, to be mad, and all of that. So I think that the focus here should be clarifying the stigma, clearing the myth about mental illness, and recognizing that one has physical illness, some have mental illness. Now, if a person has depression, he or she is going to be unwilling to get help. If they are under 18, you have authority as a parent to take them and direct them to a clinical psychologist, to a psychiatrist, and get the help required. If they're older, there's very little we can do, unfortunately, and that is the group that gets left out. So I may not be able to force them for medication. I cannot force them to even visit the psychologist. And most people who are depressed, it is very hard to work with them, because of the nature of depression. They're unwilling to respond and to take the help that is required.
Thank you. Linda, there are also certain myths associated with suicide, like people who are crazy go and take their life, or if a person commits suicide, after some days somebody else commits suicide. So a suicide can lead to another suicide. What are the other myths, and would you want to talk about them and dispel the, the myth?
All right. So sometimes people do believe that everyone who currently suffers from depression is going to kill themselves. So families who have individuals suffering from depression actually think that, will this happen to the person? In fact, individuals who are depressed, they also feel, will it happen to me? So it doesn't happen automatically. It's a decision a person has made, and it's not automatic. The second is that people who are sad always kill themselves. Not really true. People who are happy, successful, very rich also end up killing themselves. Some people say that those who talk about death eventually kill themselves. Not true. There are people who've never talked about it at all, and have yet killed themselves. You also say that people who have left a suicide note have planned it and thought about it. It may not be true. One must recognize depression might be implicated. And the second major factor is to recognize, and parents should be alert to, is your child or adolescent using or experimenting any kind of drugs? Now, these are very hardcore drugs that alter the chemistry of the brain. Under the influence of a drug, the person is removed from reality and may take a chance, actually take a decision to kill themselves, which was not absolutely something that they originally wanted. So, under the influence of drugs, there might be an attempt made, and that is where you have to watch out for.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Linda, for talking about this sensitive topic and providing parents with much needed guidance and insights about the importance of mental health and how to converse with their children in an age appropriate way. I would also like to thank you on behalf of the entire Parentune network for being with us here today and for answering all questions in details and with a lot of patience. So before we end this session, I would request you to highlight a few key points from today's session.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank Parentune for having me, or thanks Dipti, my host, and also a student whom I'm very happy to actually collaborate with. So the key points in suicide is, please understand mental illness is as important. Mental well-being is as important as physical well-being. Just like you take your vitamins and you exercise, do watch out for mental health and see if you can address emotions, positive and negative, address the issues that come up, seek professional help. It's not really bad to take help if you're unwell. And most important, please understand that help is available. We are there to reach out. And I think that everyone has a right to live and live with dignity. We need to respect that. So life has lots to actually give us. And I'd like to end by using a quote from Viktor Frankl. He's one of the most powerful psychologists I know. He says that anyone who has a why to live for will survive anyhow. So anyone who has a why to live for will survive anyhow actually means that find your purpose, find out what is your meaning, what is your role in society today, whether you're a child, whether you're a parent, whether you're a psychologist, whoever you are listening at this point of time, even if you're a psychologist and educator, what is your role, what is your meaning in life, what are you there for? And if you recognize that, you'll survive anyhow. Thank you so much, Dipti, and thank you, Parentune.
Thank you, Linda, once again. And before we conclude, I would like to tell you, if you have joined the session in between, I would like to recommend that you watch this video entirely and also share this informative session with your fellow parents. I would also like to share the helpline number with you in case you know somebody who might be in immediate help of professional assistance. So we have this helpline number and you can take note. The first is Samaritan, and the number is 9969622463. I'm repeating it, 9969622463. And the other helpline is called I Call, and the number is 022 2552 1111. 022 2552 1111. Do join us tomorrow again at 2:30 with our pediatrician, Dr. Manoj Yadav, who will be addressing your concerns related to child health and weight. Tomorrow's session is in Hindi. Please remember you can ask your questions anytime, 24/7, to our Parentune experts on the Parentune app. Take care.